Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's my weekly podcast where we discuss a book, have an author interview, and then take a look at something I've been watching in the past week or so. And today we're going to be joined by Deborah Jenkins, and she'll be discussing her book of short stories called Winter Lights. Winter Lights by Deborah Jenkins. It comes out here in the United States on, I think it's December 12th. And you know, Deborah is a fascinating individual. She joins us from over in England. And what makes her fascinating is that she is deaf. Yeah, that's right. You wouldn't know it from this interview with her. Wonderful lady. And she's had a cochlear implant. And she's able to function very well. And again, I think that she became even more attuned to certain things with her writing once she had deafness, which was not at birth, but which developed during her life. She'll tell you a little bit about that. You know, we've never done any short stories here on Books and Looks because most times I find short stories to be, these collections to be 2 or 3 great ones, 2 or 3 good ones, and 4 or 5 in the pits. But this one, from 1 through 10, these are all wonderful stories, all individual stories about all these different people. And yet, by the end, she blends everything together. And she tells us how and why she does that. She tells us which of the stories is her favorite. And she's really an interesting lady. And, you know, I review this on viewsonbooks.com. You know, every time you hear a podcast, you know that there's viewsonbooks.com where I review that book. And I'm going to tell you what, Deborah's book gets a very high marks from me because, first of all, overcoming the handicap that she has, and you know, she's not 30 years old. She's had a family. She's got a couple kids. She's got a grandchild who just turned 3 months old, I think she said. So it's she's doing a fine job, and I really think you're going to enjoy this. And you wouldn't know that this woman is deaf, and it's a tribute to her. It's a tribute to her perseverance. And it's a tribute to this whole amazing technology we have out there that helps people. So without any further ado, let's go right into our interview with Deborah Jenkins. Deborah, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto your show. It's a real honor to be here.
We are very happy to have you, and you're coming to us from across the pond, from what I understand.
Indeed, quite a long way from where you are. So I live in the south of England, in Sussex, which is about half an hour from the sea, from Brighton, and about 40 miles from London.
I see. Okay. All right. So that's good. It's a nice area over there.
It's beautiful. Yes, it's right in the middle of the countryside. It's near a forest called Ashdown Forest. Your listeners might have heard of A.A. Milne and the Winnie the Pooh stories. So A.A. Milne wrote them from his home in Ashdown Forest. The Winnie the Pooh bridge is actually just a few miles from our house.
There you go. The Digger and everybody else will be there too, not just Winnie the Pooh. So all the characters will show up there at the bridge. Well, let's start out, if we can, Deborah. How do you tell us a little bit about yourself? We know where you're from now, but did you ever take any creative writing classes? And, you know, you have a heck of a backstory that I really hope people will get inspired by. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I come from another town near Oxford, and I grew up there. I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a little girl. But, you know, as time goes by, various things happen, life happens, and you don't always get around to it. So I, went off to university, got qualified, started teaching, got married, had children. And now I'm beginning to write full time. Well, my debut came out last year, and this book, Winter Lights, as you know, has come out this festive season, this Christmas. So I work part-time in a primary school now, just around the corner from where I live. So I just work 4 minutes from my front door, which is wonderful. They take small groups of children to help them reach the expected standard in their work. That's just a few hours a week. And the rest of the time now I'm writing. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
Wow. That's great. Now, did you ever have to take any creative writing classes?
Well, I've done workshops, creative writing workshops. I've gone away for writing weekends with a national organisation of writers I'm a member of in this country. I've never taken, heavy duty writing classes for weeks and months at a time, but I've done lots of day and weekend workshops over the years. And at each one, I've picked up a little bit more, strategies and gained from the experience of other more experienced authors. And that has been a huge support for me.
Now, are you a voracious reader? Have you always liked to read books?
I absolutely love reading, and it's more than a pastime for me. It's almost something I need to do to live in other worlds. My way of relaxing is to read. And I have many very favorite writers, some of which are American, who I absolutely love to read. And I've always got my eye out for their latest books.
Well, why don't you tell us one or two of them? Who are your favorite writers?
So my favorite writers include Anne Tyler and Patchett. And also Elizabeth Strout, who is just one of my favorite authors. And a British author called Claire Chambers is also a great favorite. All of these people actually write about everyday life, what they love to pontificate about, what they love to explore in their books. It's just everyday life, the sort of normal hopes and dreams of ordinary people, the everyday stresses, the things that we're all experiencing all the time. And these are the things that really fascinate me in my own writing and in my reading, human nature, how people operate, why they make the decisions they do. And those are the kinds of books I love to read most.
Great. Well, now, you say you always wanted to be a writer. Did you start writing at a very young age? As a child, were you writing stories?
Yes, I started writing, I would say about the age of 8. I used to line up all my teddy bears and my dolls, and I used to, because I always wanted to be a teacher as well, I used to give them little writing tasks. And then, of course, they were infuriatingly bad at doing the writing tasks, so then I had to go ahead and actually write the stories for them. And then I started showing the stories to my parents and my teachers, and they seemed to like them. So then I started writing for things like church newsletters, and I started writing for school competitions, that kind of thing. And as I got older, I started writing short stories for magazines, and one or two got accepted. And then I started teaching. So I started doing quite a lot of educational writing. But my dream was always to write a chapter book, a long book and a book of short stories.
And now, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, while you work a little bit at the primary school, you consider yourself a full-time writer.
And I am almost a full-time writer, yes. I mean, I work, as I say, about 1.5 days a week at a primary school. So most of my time is spent writing. And actually, a lot of the inspiration for my writing comes from children, the everyday situations that I come into contact with at work.
Now, friends, we have to talk about something right now, and this is a lovely lady, a wonderful writer, but she has a little bit of a disability issue. And would you mind telling everybody about your situation, please?
Not at all. No, I'm now severely deaf. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease some years ago. One of the side effects of this is that over time, I've had many, many, many ear infections, which has reduced my hearing considerably. So I now have a bone-implanted hearing aid. Normal hearing aids don't work for me. This is a great support to me, obviously, otherwise we couldn't be having this conversation now. I'm also waiting for an operation to have one on the other side. But it has its challenges. It has huge challenges for everyday life and for writing, actually, if I'm going around doing writing workshops or for talks. I've had to adjust the way that I operate quite considerably on an everyday basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wonderful that you've overcome this, and it also must be a challenge because you had full hearing for a majority of your life, my understanding is, and this has only come on in the last few years.
Yes, it has. And I suppose, like with every disability, I had to make the decision as to whether I was going to let this, change my ambitions and hopes regarding my writing and my work, or whether I was just going to find a way around it. Because all my life I'd wanted to do this thing, to be involved in writing on a more full-time basis. So either I decided, well, I can't do that anymore because the author talks and the workshops are being more difficult, or I have to find a way around it. So I decided on the latter.
Well, I'm telling you what, you've done a wonderful job. And friends, if you're listening, when you're listening to this, we haven't had one gap, we haven't had one edit. What she calls, I think, a bone implant. I think over here we might call it a cochlear implant. You're doing well. You wouldn't know that you have a deafness at all. And kudos to you for overcoming this challenge, which was thrown at you later in life. You're an inspiration. I think you'll be an inspiration to a lot of people who listen to this podcast. So good for you. But that makes me question now, was the hearing loss a hindrance to your writing, or do you think it helped push out the creativity in your writing?
I think it's been, in a way, both. I've had to adapt. So I have a little microphone that I can take to events where people can speak into it if I can't hear them. So I've had to adapt. But I've also felt very burdened as a result of my disability to include people as naturally as I can in my own writing, in my own stories, who have disabilities. So, for example, in Winterlights, there is a story about somebody who has hearing loss. I've also included a disabled person in one of the other stories. And I think, society is full of all kinds of people. We're not just all the same. You could say we're all disabled in a way. We all have our challenges in life, both physically and emotionally. So I think I kind of feel what I can do is to kind of highlight people's different situations by just including them in my stories when that seems natural.
But that's great, because you do include people with handicaps or with disabilities in the stories here. And, that's really, I think that just gives it that extra bit of depth, that it's not, we pass somebody who's in a wheelchair, but you'll have a person with a disability or with a handicap part of your story. And I think that's just wonderful that you've been able to do that. Now, last night I was talking to some people. They were over at the house, and we all concluded that short stories are the hardest thing to write. Do you find short stories hard, and why did you choose to do a book of short stories at this time?
Well, that's really interesting, because I don't find that. I think the short form is more natural for me as a writer. And I think it's probably because I'm not really a planner when I write. I mean, obviously, I have to be to some extent, but I'm more of a pantser, kind of fly by the seat of my pants. I have an idea or a visual image, and I start writing a story. And to some extent with the short form, you can just see what happens and perhaps add in or take away a few details so that it does become more well planned. Whereas with a novel, a full length novel, and my first book was a novel, the story arc is a lot longer and deeper. You can't do that. You have to be more planned. And for me, that's more of a discipline, because my personality is not naturally inclined to that.
I see. Okay. Because again, my personal feeling on the people who were here last night, it's as if when you're doing a short story, you might not have the beginning. You almost come into the middle of a story, and then you have an end, and you have a lot of different stories. And it's a challenge for a lot of people if you're not like you are, the way you write. And I know I couldn't do it. I tried many a time. After 2 or 3 pages, get rid of it. Can't do it. So again, very, very good, very well done. But now, why did you decide to write a book of short stories?
Well, I think for myself personally, I really love reading short stories, particularly at this time of year, because often I'm very busy and I don't have time to sit down, read a whole novel. What I like about short stories is they are like photographs for me. They're like a photograph of something, a snapshot into somebody's life or into a situation. You don't have all the background information. So the way it's a challenge in a way, and I can see this might be a way in which some people would find short stories difficult. It's a challenge to take that snapshot in a way that creates a strong visual image for your readers, but gives enough information for them to find the story satisfying. And I really enjoy doing that.
Yeah, we might not need all the background, we come in at a point where everything has started to gel and we have what's going on, but you don't need where they began, the whole thing. And so that's very interesting. Did you always want to write a Christmas type book of short stories?
I did, actually. In fact, that was my first desire when I wanted to get published, was to write a book of short stories around Christmas time, because I think the winter is a very cozy time to sit down and read. I read much more in the winter. In the summer, often I'm out in the garden, in the late light evenings. But in the winter, I read a lot more. And I did actually approach somebody who was in publishing and ask them what they thought about having a book of short stories published. But they said, publishers would be interested in short stories by somebody who isn't already published. So I abandoned that and worked on my novel. And then I thought, well, maybe my publisher would be interested in a book of short stories now. And because they publish short stories, they had a look at 2 or 3 of the ones in Winter Lights, and they liked them. So they decided to go for them, which I was very grateful for.
Well, that's really wonderful. I'm glad they did that. Now, did you have a set number of stories you wanted to write, or did they tell you we want X number of stories in this book?
No, they didn't. They told me it had to be, they gave me the kind of the minimum word count for it. And originally I was going to write 12 because I thought 12 Days of Christmas, that sounds quite good. That I might base it around that. But in the end, the way that the stories emerged, that didn't really work out. So I reckoned it would be about 10. And I think with the epilogue, it ends up about 10. It just seems sometimes, I'm sure if you write, or if any of your listeners are writers, they'll understand this, that sometimes your stories kind of almost, or your characters kind of almost take control and that you realizing they are dictating the length of what happens. So sometimes, you just have to let it roll. And I think that's what happened in the end with Winter Lights.
Okay, wonderful. Now, again, we were talking last night. It's a wide-ranging conversation here in South Carolina about your book last night. So you begin the book with an author's note. And it is one of the most unique author's notes we have ever seen. Could you tell us a little bit about that and why you decided to include that?
Yes, I can. So I started writing the stories about 2 Christmases ago while I was waiting for my first book to be published. And then I had to stop because various things were going on and I had to do some marketing for my first book. So after Fairlight Books said they would be interested, I carried on writing them that summer. And of course, writing in the summer, it's very difficult to get that kind of wintry, festive vibe. So I thought I'm going to need to put some music on. So I just put on Spotify some of my favorite festive music and also just some of my favorite music generally that seemed to fit with the themes of the stories. When it came to submit the stories, I thought to myself, maybe the readers would actually be interested to hear, how these different tracks marry up with the stories that I wrote. So I emailed my publisher and said, this is a really wacky idea, and I quite understand if you think I'm off the wall, but what do you think about publishing a playlist in the digital version with a link so people can just click on the link, or just listing it in the paperback? And they went away and they came back and they said, you know what? That's a really good idea. So that's one of the great things about working directly, with the publisher, is that you can make those kinds of suggestions. Sometimes they take them on.
Well, I tell you, I really like that. And for each short story, we have a song or that we're going to be listening to. And again, I like it. I've been listening to them, and yeah, that's really unique. And so I'm happy you added that to the book. So now let's get down into this book. Okay. Were these stories that are the way they're published? They're 10 stories and 8, and then there's 9 and 10, which sort of wrap things up. But did you write these in that order? Did you write the first book, The Key? Was that the first one you wrote, or who rearranged or arranged the order of the stories?
Okay, so I originally wrote them in a slightly different order. My first story was at the end of the line. But after I'd submitted them, my publisher said, because of the timeline in the run up to Christmas, it kind of makes more sense to change the order slightly so that the last stories come at Christmas and New Year. And, in the run up, the earlier stories come a bit before that. So I was quite happy about that.
Okay, that's good. Now, and again, this is probably an unfair question, but do you have a favorite of the stories in 1 through 8? Do you have one that stands out to you as maybe your favorite story that you wrote?
I think I have 2 or 3 favorites, if I'm honest, but one of them is Once Did Orla Davis, because it's about a child's view of a festive season and looking at life from the point of view of a child. And I just find children so immensely inspiring. I mean, I work with them. Obviously, I have a lot of experience of them through my work. And their whole approach to life is so kind of raw. They haven't got that screen. They don't screen their emotions. And I think it kind of teaches us so much about human nature, actually. You can see in children that desire to be included, that desire to be accepted, to be well thought of. I find the emotions of children have a lot to teach me about the emotions of human beings. And so that story is a particularly precious one to me.
What I find out when I start a book of short stories, what I've seen in the past is maybe with 10 stories, 2 or 3 are really good, 3 are not bad, and 3 or 4 are clunkers. And, that's where I think yours separates itself from the regular one, because I got loads of books of short stories, and I'll be honest with you, I don't want to read them because I don't want to read clunker stories. So this one is not like that at all. Friends, when you get this book, I don't care if you get it in print edition or in Kindle edition or anything else. When you get this book, there are 10 wonderful stories. You have done a great job in this, and it's so different in that regard than most books.
Well, thank you. That's lovely of you to say so. Thank you.
Well, you begin with I enjoyed the first story. It's called The Key. Could you tell us a little bit about what The Key is about?
So The Key is about a single mum who has a lot of responsibility at work and is juggling the demands of her job, caring for an aged parent, and her single teenage daughter who is becoming a little bit challenging. Let's put it that way. So that's what the book is about. And then something happens to her, and then the story is about how that situation kind of gets resolved.
Right. And the key is a key. And that's part of the whole story. And the fact that there is something happened to the key or didn't happen with the key. And then, again, it all gets resolved. And, as we're talking, until I met you now, I didn't know you worked at this school. And the main character in that story does also work in a school, if I'm not mistaken.
She does. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that inspired by somebody at your school, or just you just happened to pop into your mind?
I think it was inspired partly by the fact that in the past in school I've had a lot of responsibility. So trying to juggle life, with the family and work demands and all the rest of it. It sometimes became a bit crazy. But I think also the fact that, life can be interesting when your children become teenagers. It kind of needs a very different approach to parenting. And I remember my husband and I, when our eldest, who is lovely, when he became a teenager, we thought, well, this is a bit different. And we read a book. I think it's called How to Really Love Your Teenager. And it was a fascinating book. And one of the things he said in that book is, in many cultures of the world, children are considered adults when they reach puberty. So parents, you need to back off. You need to give them more responsibility and let them make mistakes and learn from it. And I think that, in a way, is at the heart of that story.
Well, it's a very good story. One of the sidelines, which won't give anything away about it, but as this poor woman is backing out of the driveway, she runs over the neighbor's trash bin and knocks all the trash in the street. And I thought that was a heck of a way to get started with this. So, yeah, she had more in her mind than worrying which way she was going. And, that's what happens. Now, another really fine story is called End of the Line. End of the Line, which deals with a Good Samaritan type story. Does that fit best at a Christmas time, do you think, as opposed to other times of year? Do you see more Good Samaritans at the Christmas time, do you think?
I think it can go one of two ways, actually. I think sometimes at Christmas time, we can all be so absorbed in our own little worlds, in our own little trying to make our own little perfect family Christmases, that we can forget to actually remember, the whole point of it is to be sharing love and showing kindness to other people. But I think if appeals go out at Christmas time, they're generally quite well supported, aren't they? And I think it can be a time when people will suddenly remember, oh yes, actually this is all about, light and love and hope and sharing. And maybe I need to be a bit more unselfish and notice other people's needs as well.
And here we have the character in this, which is not the same character as the first book, obviously, but this person is rushing around also to get where she has to go, and I think there's presents involved, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I'm seeing a bit of a theme here now. We have people who are rushing around, and it's fascinating what happens to their lives. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think for a lot of people, life can be very busy, very stressed at times. And we're all very good at saying yes to extra responsibility, but perhaps sometimes we should say no. We're managing our jobs, we're managing our families. And then there's Christmas with all these expectations of, including as many people as you can, buying presents for everybody, wrapping them up perfectly. And it can just be an impossible ideal. And maybe we need to just be a bit kinder to ourselves, because actually the original Christmas was very messy indeed.
Why, right. That's very true. Now, another one we're going to go to talk just a moment about is called Christmas at the Masala Ram. Now, we're dealing with an Indian restaurant over there. Could you tell us a little bit about that one? That's a cute one.
Well, that was inspired actually by my own heritage. My grandparents on my mother's side were Anglo-Indian. They came back to the UK, or they came to live in the UK after the partition of India and Pakistan in the 1940s. And when they arrived here, because they have this Anglo-Indian sort of ancestry, they expected very much to be welcomed, because they had the English side. But they weren't. They were treated quite badly. And as soon as they opened their mouths, they experienced quite a bit of prejudice. And they used to talk about this when they were alive. In fact, my mum remembers when she was a little girl being bewildered by the fact that her parents were not treated kindly by everybody that they met. And that in a way, and so we were all, because of this Anglo-Indian heritage, we were all practically weaned, my brothers and I, on Indian food. So we spent a lot of time in Indian restaurants, and we could all cook curry, and curry is our favourite food. And I just thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to imagine a situation where, you have people working in an Indian restaurant, and yet the rest of the country is celebrating Christmas, which is very different to your own particular celebrations. I was kind of exploring how that would go, and maybe there'd be some friction between the father and the son about the way the business should be run. So it's all imaginary, but it all kind of came from comments that my grandparents made many years ago.
Well, the thing is, this gentleman who runs the restaurant, he may have had prejudice, but by the time we find him in this book, he is a beloved figure, I think. The restaurant does well. He has friends coming in. He knows everybody, and he's even delivering food on Christmas Eve or sometime during the Christmas season, and his son can't figure that out. So
yes, absolutely. So yeah, it's a kind of double-edged sword. I think he had this past that was very distressing, but he'd actually made something of it and was now doing really well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, now I read sometime a few years ago that the what do they call it? The official food, or the food of England, is actually Tikka Masala. It's the number one food over there. I thought it was fish and chips. I didn't know.
It always used to be fish and chips, but what happened is so many people coming into our country, since the 40s and 50s, set up Indian restaurants, sold their delicious food. I mean, in our local town, there are more Indian restaurants than any other kind of restaurant. Absolutely. Chicken tikka masala is our number one dish now.
Oh, word. That's really something. Oh, boy. Well, the young man, by the end of the story, he gets his lesson. He sort of learns what's going on. And again, another really good story as he's forced to deliver this Indian food where he doesn't want to go, and at a time he doesn't want to do it. So, but that was really fascinating. Hey, let's jump to story number 8, which I really like. It's called Something for Yourself. This is a very interesting story about it's about a homebound patient, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it's about a carer, somebody who cares for her husband and also takes paid caring jobs and also cleaning work to top up her income. And she goes on a journey to a strange place to care for a strange man who has a bit of a reputation. Care agency asks her to do that, and the story is about what happens as a result of going into the middle of the forest on a dark night to help this disabled man. Yeah,
and I think it was 4 or 5 people before her quit within a day, and now she's like the newest one to go out there and try to help this man.
That's right. And this story actually is one of my favorites because I think that, paid and unpaid carers in today's society as a sort of unsung heroes, really. We're all so fascinated, aren't we, by celebrity and people on our big screens. But actually the real heroes are people who are, day in, day out caring for either family members or, in a paid capacity. And there's, in England, at least in the UK, we have an ageing population. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but there is such a need for carers, and people who do that job are so undervalued and underpaid. So I just wanted to try and experiment with a little snapshot into what the life of somebody like that would be like.
Yeah. Well, at one time I thought she was going to be just walking out the door, but that's not the way it ended up, and that's what made it so much fun, I'll tell you. Now, you have one character in your book who's only appears in maybe one or so of these short stories, but she has a presence over this entire book. Her name, I think, is Lady Judith Trenton. Who is she? And tell us a bit about her.
Well, Judith Trenton is a benefactor, a wealthy benefactor, or descended from wealthy people, perhaps not wealthy anymore, but lives in a big house on the edge of the forest. She's one of these people, there are often people in small communities that everybody knows, because they volunteer, they support everything, they help everybody. They may have a fairly illustrious heritage, but they're in there with the local community, helping and supporting however they can. So this is what Lady Trenton is like. And actually, we moved from London to Sussex, where we live now, 5 years ago. And it really hit me living in a small town. There are always these characters that everybody knows because they're great people. And I suppose that's why I wanted to have a character like that in the book.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, and this, I hadn't thought about this, isn't there a connection to India with Lady Trenton? Was her husband in India?
Yes, so her father was in India. And they came back after the partition, a bit like my grandparents did. So she was a little girl when she came back from India.
There you go. So it's not quite your story, but a little bit of your background is with that. Yeah, that's what's. She's amazing. She's a fascinating character. Like I said, you won't know all about this until you get to later on. Now that brings us to later on, Deborah. Had you deliberately written the stories so that by the end, number 9 and number 10, which we're not going to get into here, that it would all tie together? Is that how you wanted to do that?
Well, initially it wasn't. Initially, I just thought I would write a book of short stories. So I think I must have written about 3 stories. When I found that characters from other stories were sort of popping up in my new stories, almost without asking permission. And I thought to myself, I better take them out because, a bit strange. And I thought, well, actually, maybe if I'm really, really careful, because I knew it would take a lot of planning, I could somehow weave all the stories together at the end. But I'd already started writing when I made that decision. So I thought I may not be able to pull it off, but I'll have a go. And I sent the stories in like that to my publisher, although we did tweak some of the details after. I think on the whole, I'm pleased with the way it's worked out.
It's wonderful. Again, friends, when you read this book, you're reading 1 through 8, and then 9 comes, and it's like, oh my word, and then 10 comes, oh my word. It's just wonderful how everybody gets interconnected and everything is all there. It's just wonderful way you did that. I'm glad that eventually you got everybody together. That's really good. So what's next, Deborah? What's next? Another long book? Or are you going to do some more short stories? What do you think you're going to be doing next?
I think I'm going to go back to writing a novel next. And I have a working title, Hearing Loss. That's the working title for my next novel, which is perhaps not surprising. But it's in the very early stages. But my idea is, although it will contain a character with hearing loss, the themes are going to be more around the fact that actually perhaps in today's world, many of us have just lost that ability to listen, to ourselves, and our own real needs, to our consciences, to the world, to the needs of the world environmentally. Our society is somehow lost its way a little because of our inability to listen. So the themes of the book, I'm going to have to work quite hard about thinking how I'm going to communicate those through my story arc and through my characters. But that's my plan. I always think big, you can always come down.
There you go. Now, for those people who might be looking, you said your first book is a novel. What was that about?
So my first book is called Braver, and it's about unlikely friendships in a local community and how somehow this transforms the lives of a small group of people who are facing tremendous challenges. And then something really bad happens and they work together to solve this problem. And I wrote it during the first lockdown, actually, when I couldn't teach because I'm extremely vulnerable. So I was very, very grateful to Fairlight Books for publishing it, because I didn't think anyone would ever publish it. And then it incredibly went on to be nominated for 2 awards. So that was really built my confidence as a writer.
Well, that's great. That's
wonderful. I'm very grateful for that book.
So now, when you write, are you a morning writer, an evening writer? What's your schedule like?
I write until lunchtime. So I get up in the morning and I try to write from 9 till 1. And then in the afternoons, I sometimes will be doing other writerly things around the book. Or, sometimes if I'm stuck, plot twist, I might just go for a walk. We have a beautiful nature reserve near our house. And sometimes just walking around there, ideas will drop into my head like stones as to what I should write next. So that's generally my plan when I'm writing.
Okay, so that's how you like to do it. That's good. Well, everybody has a different thing. Do you find that I was talking to one lady who cannot write in the, when was it? She can't write in the 2 months, can't write in the winter and summer, but she loves to write in the spring and the autumn. Do you have any seasonal preferences to your writing?
That's really interesting. I don't think I do have seasonal preferences. I mean, I must admit that moving to the countryside has been a huge inspiration. And because the seasons are all beautiful here where I live, the trees are always just at a slightly different stage. We're only half an hour from the sea. And I love walking along the coast, by the coast in all seasons. It's more the place where I live that's important to me rather than the seasons. But that's fascinating.
That's very good. Well, anyway, I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been a lot of fun to have you on. I say thank you for joining us, Deborah. And your book launch happens today in England. It's publication day. When does it come out here in America? Do you remember?
It's available in the States and Canada from the 12th of December, but I think it can be pre-ordered now from places like Barnes & Noble and Amazon if people are interested.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly hoping they are. We're going to be pushing this because it's a wonderful thing. And I thank you for taking time out of your day to chat with us here on Books and Looks.
Thank you so much, Blaine. I'm really honored to have been invited on your show, and I'm really grateful to you for such a wonderful interview.
Well, very good. Hey, friends, we'll be right back in a moment. Well, Deborah, I had a wonderful time with that interview, and I hope all of you did too, friends, because it was a very, very good author of very good books, and I'm going to tell you what, it's here in time for Christmas, and I think that's something you might want to buy for your Christmas shopping list. Anyway, what have I been looking at? Well, if you've been following me in the last few weeks, we talked about the woolly caterpillar. We talked about daylight savings time, and now the reversion to standard time. And now we're talking about game night. That's right, game night. I'm looking at game night because you know what? People said it gets dark too early. You know what? Play a game. And that's what we've been doing. Yeah, the family has been doing this. We have some friends in the neighborhood, and they come over once a week, midweek, and we sit and we play board games. You know, I have some other friends who they like cards, okay? I know Bob Van Norton, he loves playing cards, so he gets together with a group of people. They play cards. It's perfect. You're not reading, you're not watching TV, you're not twiddling your thumbs. You're having a complete, fun time watching either a deck of cards or a board. And I'm going to tell you what, we had played some amazing board games. And do you play board games? People think it's just for, the kids, No, not really. If you see the board games nowadays, they're wonderful things. Beautiful, beautiful boxes, designs, the boards, the tokens. It's just great. One of our favorite games is called Azul, A-Z-U-L, which is the national game of Portugal. And it's a tile game. And there are all these different colored tiles, and you've got to fill up boxes of squares and everything else. It's a wonderful game. It takes probably around 30, 40 minutes to play, and you got to think. Well, it says, we're just collecting colors and this and that. Yeah, but there's some strategy, and so it's a fun game. The other night we played a game called Suro, T-S-U-R-O, and it's a game about following lines. You have cards, and you have to move. You put a tile on top of a board piece, and then you have to follow the line. And the key is not to go off the board. Friends, I was off the board pretty quickly, okay? I lost a lot of those games. But you know what? They're fun. I don't care if I win. I don't care if I lose. I know somebody who we play with who does not like to lose. But, sometimes you got to lose. But it's fun. Everybody plays it. Magda plays it. Nathaniel plays it. I play it. The two ladies who come, we play it. We love Suro. And so, you know what? If the nights are long, consider a game night. I'll be very honest with you. I go to Amazon. There's a host of board games out there. And they're all from like short little games to lengthy games, like one of the Rails to Trails game, or Trails to Rails, whatever it's called, by Catan. That took 3 hours to play. Well, that was a lot of fun playing that, though. And so they're all different lengths. There's one called Pandemic, where you all work together to cure a pandemic. It's just, you know what? I can't say enough for what's happened. It's no longer Monopoly, Parcheesi, Risk, the game of life. No, these are neat games, good games, fun games. You got to think, got a lot of strategy. Everyone's always different. So anyway, that's what I'm looking at this week. It's called Game Night. It's here at the DeSantis household almost every week. I'll tell you what, make it a part of your household, and you'll see how much fun it is to do nothing but concentrate on a game. Wipe your mind, friends, and enjoy playing a board game. So anyway, on behalf of viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of our good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks saying, may all your leaves be pages.